most of the adult male population in this area worked over the last 50 years or so. My grandfather was a miner here, a lot of my relations worked here. My father, as a joiner and a carpenter, worked here for a little time too. But the mining industry has been totally decimated after the strike in the mid-80s. I remember the last time I was here, it was during that strike, and I was taking part in picket duty. At the time I was chairman of one of the local Labour Party branches a few miles up the road there. There was a friend of mine who had stayed out on strike for almost a year, and he was basically starved back to work. And in the morning that he returned to work, he came along here on a bus with the other working miners and passed a huge picket line here. The bus drew in here, and my friend got off the bus, and so traumatic was the experience of having to cross the picket line that he was violently sick. This is the church in which my parents were married. It's the church where I was baptised, made in First Communion, was confirmed. It's therefore integral, I suppose, to my own spiritual experience. I find no difficulty in my position as a left-winger and a traditional Catholic believer. The two elements cross-fertilise each other. One emerges from the other. And the whole of Scottish Catholic history in the last century bears this out. Hence the work, the Confession of Isobel Gowdie, which is a warning against the pogrom, against fascism, against the witch hunt.
Can you hear the religious themes in the work?
In some places more so than in others. Certainly they are there subliminally in the texture and hopefully in the mind. For example, we get the Lux Aeterna theme here in the basses. Lux Aeterna Dona is free. And gradually it becomes more obvious as the piece goes on, more integrally embedded in this texture. Isobel Gowdie herself, first of all, was a woman who was executed in 1662 on a charge of witchcraft. Under severe torture, she confessed to the most bizarre things. She confessed to having been baptised by the devil. She confessed to joining a coven of 13 which met at night. She confessed to journeying to the centre of the earth to meet the king and queen of the fairies. She'd basically gone mad under torture. She was convicted, strangled and burnt in pitch at the stake amid scenes of hysterical fright and sadism. I think it was my concern to take this historical event and to fashion something of contemporary relevance from it. And that is that witch-hunting tendencies can blossom and erupt in our own society just as much as it did in the 16th and 17th centuries. We saw this in the Nazi Holocaust of 50 years ago. Over the last 20 years, we've seen a steady rise in overt racism in this country. In Northern Ireland and in the west of Scotland, every 12th of July, we have thousands taking to the streets in orange marches, which to me seems a calculated act of intimidation against a minority population.
Probably the most memorable gesture in the piece is these 13 chords. Why the 13?
It's probably the most simplistic gesture in the whole piece, and for that reason I thought about doing something else with it, but I thought sometimes the most simple gestures are the best. That's not something you learn at university, by the way. It's something you learn through living life naturally in other ways. So these 13 strokes are basically just a device for me to get the second section going, but if anything can be taken from it for the audience's sake, it's the representation of the satanic 13.
It's funny looking at your music, having memories of you looking at mine at university. I don't remember you talking about simplistic gestures then. I think they were frowned upon.
Yes, well, that's the problem with varsity musical education, that sometimes you're geared towards things that aren't basically important as far as the wider audience is concerned. But I remember a lot of simplistic things in your music.
It's inevitable that it's written 12 hours before, I expect.
Oh, now you tell me.
He has got an acuteness and an awareness, particularly of the way that music is now bursting in Scotland, and that composers there have suddenly got a place. You know that in Scotland, literature and painting have been bursting for a long time. Well, now music is starting, and he's right at the forefront of that. I think Scotland is a very special case. First, there is an awareness among sponsors of the public and private sectors that music is important. That has to be said. Also, I think politically Scotland is quite interesting in that there is a very strong feeling that as Scotland really has no say in its own government and its own running, it's governed completely from London and at Scotland's expense, that some statement has to be made. And I think the arts are one very powerful way of doing this.
The politicians, the administrators and the performers, I think all have an increasingly healthy respect for the creative artist. The Strathclyde region, for example, in partnership with the Scottish Arts Council, commissioning the 10 Strathclyde concertos of Maxwell Davies. Sponsors, commercial sponsors, realising that to commission a new work of art will last a lot longer than a 2-hour concert.
I think there's a sense of revival here just now, which springs from political developments, and it feeds into what artists and musicians are doing here, almost in a parallel with what has been happening in Eastern Europe, in places like Lithuania, Estonia, where there's a sense of national re-emergence, a sense of self-identity. It makes Glasgow a very interesting place to be, and all this feeds into what I'm doing as a composer at the moment.
We like your compositions very much. It's very beautiful.
Thank you very much.
I tell you what is for me difficult. When comes this section. But many counterpoints. Look. Of course, for a musician, which are playing here, should be very proper beat. But for me, I must take care of them, of them, and to compromise a little bit. But it's very, very good because it's very, very organized. And when new tempo comes, it's connected with former tempo. It's very cohesive. It's very, very good. I like it very much.
I think what's most exciting of all, really, for somebody who, as it were, haunts the concert halls, is that it's the old story. The first performance is okay. Where do you get your second performance from? This is the great cry of composers. But increasingly there's evidence that organisations which commit themselves to commissioning new work are going to commit themselves to getting it into their repertoire. Jimmy Macmillan's new piece, for example, is going to be done again in Glasgow later in the year. His last piece, which was commissioned by the Scottish Chamber Orchestra, was then taken on by the BBC Scottish Symphony Orchestra and toured around Europe.
Well, the SSO has a history of supporting Scottish composers. The music department at the BBC is run by a composer, a Scottish composer, so we always seem to get landed with it, which is no bad thing, because somebody has to promote these things. Yes, somebody has to support Scottish music, and if we're it, then thank you very much. Some of it's brilliant, some of it's awful.
It's a privilege to play Scottish composers at the moment because we've got a lot of good writers. There's a good tradition in Scottish writing. There's a good school there. I think in years to come they'll look back and say that was the Scottish school of writing. And they're doing a wonderful job for us, the contemporary playing musicians. Macmillan is the cream.